Hi everyone, and welcome to the AWS Nordics office hours with me, Gunnar Grosch. I'm a developer advocate here at Amazon Web Services, and this is our weekly show based out of the Nordics, where I bring on AWS experts to talk about a specific topic and let you, our viewers, ask your questions. So if you have any questions throughout the hour, just post them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. And this week, I am joined by Ben Smith. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Hi, Gunnar. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. So tell everyone a bit about Ben.
Sure. So I'm a senior developer advocate for AWS, specializing in serverless. So I work inside the serverless product org. I've been at AWS about 2 years, and I'm based over in London.
All right. So this, as I mentioned, every week we have a specific topic to talk about, and this week is no different. We're going to talk about AWS Step Function and what has happened with AWS Step Function, everything that's new with every AWS Step Functions. And I think we have a lot to cover this week, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a show that you and I have tried to put together for a few months, isn't it? But the Step Functions team this year have kept coming up with new releases, and we kept saying, okay, let's push that back until they've done that one. Let's push that back until they release that. So eventually we have to just pick a time and show what's been happening up till now. But there's been so much great stuff from the Step Functions team this year. So we've got a lot to kind of cover in this 1 hour demo.
Yeah, and if you ever watched the show before, you know that I like show and tell, and this is definitely going to be a show and tell hour. So if you have any questions throughout, just post them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them where it's appropriate throughout the hour. So let's have a quick look at what's happened with Step Functions.
Yeah, so I've put here at the top here the kind of 4 highlights, at least for me. I think these are really significant releases this year, but there's been a lot more that we could pick out. So the first was the data flow simulator, and this is a new feature of the AWS management console, which lets you model your JSON path and your JSON data as it flows through each state in your Step Functions workflow. And we'll have a little bit of a look in a minute about how you can use that and how that can help you. The next was Workflow Studio, and I think this is massive. So Workflow Studio kind of created a drag and drop interface for building out Step Functions workflows. And it's a completely different, new, easier way of building out workflows where you don't need any code knowledge whatsoever. So it's really great for business users. It's really great for maybe sitting next to one of your stakeholders as you build out your workflow and showing them how your application might look. And then very recently, they launched the Sdk Integration. So that's a new type of task which lets you call any service that has an SDK API. So that means you can now call, I think it's 9,000 actions, right, using the SDK task. So it just totally expands the usage of Step Functions. What it also means is that you need a lot less Lambda functions in your Step Functions workflow. So previously, people were using a Lambda function to call some kind of API, to run some sort of compute on their data. Now you can just build or call that API directly within your workflow. You don't need to spin up a Lambda function. And we'll look at how you can replace Lambda functions with this SDK integration. And then the last thing I want to cover is not specifically a Step Functions release, but it's a really interesting thing that integrates into Step Functions very well. It's called SAM Accelerate. Now, SAM is the serverless application model. It's a infrastructure as code framework for building serverless applications. And they recently launched a new kind of component of SAM. It's in preview at the moment, I believe. What this does is it allows you to automatically and very quickly sync the local version of your serverless application with a cloud developer environment. And it uses AWS Service APIs to automatically upload code to your cloud developer environment account. And I'll show you how quickly and how you can use that in just a moment. So we've got quite a lot to get through.
We have. And I think I mentioned for you when we talked about this episode previously, the new SDK integrations is something that I'm really excited about. I've been using these couple of weeks to remove Lambda functions from my workflows and using integrations instead. So looking forward to seeing more from you about that as well. So is it time to jump into the console straight away?
Yeah, I think it's always easier to see how things work by looking at real world examples. So what I was going to do here is look back at a previous blog post that we did about a year ago, which was build an application which takes in a web page form post and figures out if that web page form post submission, if the user was happy with what they wrote or not happy. So it detects the sentiment by using a service called Amazon Comprehend. Then generates a reference number based on that contact form submission, saves that in a DynamoDB table, and then if they were unhappy, it will notify an administrator to let them know that there's a case they need to follow up on. And if they were happy, then it will just save it and move on. And then it returns the reference number back to the user. So this is what we're going to build out, and we're going to build that out using those new features, right? But I've actually already started a bit of this already to get us a bit of a jump start on this. Okay, so this is the workflow at the moment. So it receives an inbound HTTP post from a form request. It generates a customer reference number. That's a Lambda function that just generates a random ID essentially. It records that random ID in the DynamoDB table, and then there's another Lambda function which sends out an email using SES. And here on the left, you can see the ASL, the Amazon States language, which defines this particular step functions workflow. And if you're, even if you're very fluent at ASL, this becomes quite difficult to read and navigate quite quickly because, there's only 3 tasks here and there's a lot of code written out. So this is one of the key reasons that the team created Workflow Studio. So Workflow Studio is this new editing experience, which you can get to by simply clicking Workflow Studio here. That takes me to the Workflow Studio console. So here you can see the same workflow. On the left here, I'm able to search for all the different tasks and integrations and states for my step functions workflow. And I can simply drag them into my workflow to start building it out. And then when I click on each one of those steps, I have a form on the right here, which allows me to configure that step. So what we're going to do is we're going to build out this workflow to be a bit more rich, do a few more things, okay? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a Lambda function, which will run some code which will use Amazon Comprehend, which is an AI service or a machine learning service, which will detect the sentiment within a string of text, okay? And that's already been deployed into this account. So I'm just going to name this correct.
So let me just ask you a question, Ben.
Yeah.
What I've seen myself doing since the release of Workflow Studio is that I tend to do everything with infrastructure as code, of course, so don't usually use the console that much. But now with Workflow Studio, I've started using the console specifically for building these workflows. So then making use of that step function, the state language output from it, and then using that with infrastructure as code. Is that something you see? Do you do the same, or how do you work when you're building your workflows?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do in this demo, actually, because I think the Workflow Studio is a really good way of getting started really quickly. You can rapidly build out a workflow with so many different tasks and different steps and different choice states. You can configure it with this form, and then you can switch to this tab over here where you have the entire ASL definition, which you can then copy and paste into your local IDE, for a more sort of future-proof way of building out your application. Cool. Now, I know the step function team are working hard on making that developer experience between console and local more seamless and more sort of user-friendly. But at the moment, the way I tend to use Workflow Studio is to get a real jump start on my building experience before then switching back to local, which is where I do most of my ongoing development. Okay, so we've got our Lambda function, and we're going to choose which Lambda function this will invoke. My browser is so zoomed in now, I'm sort of almost don't remember how to use So we're going to search for our Lambda function name. It's called detect sentiment there. And we're going to use the payload as the input. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to use this result path to tell it where to put the result of this Lambda function. And we're going to put it in something called send. And that's it. We'll just save that. Oh, actually, I might as well. Yeah, we'll just save that for now. Apply and exit. We'll run this through and see what we get. So I'm going to just run this manually for now. Start. Oh, I need to save it again. Execution. I'm going to provide my input payload. So here I'm giving it a user ID. I'm giving it a name. I'm giving it an email. And here's my message that it's going to detect if it was positive or negative. Normally, I would submit this via my form, but I'm still in the testing stage, right? Running the detect sentiment Lambda function. Spin that up, create the environment, invoke it. There we go. Now I can step through this, right? And I can see, okay, yep, that's the payload that I provided. Here's the output that created. So it saved the output into something called sentiment results. That's something that we set, right? And you can see that it decided it was negative because I wrote my package didn't arrive. That sounds pretty negative. So that's all correct. Then it recorded that transaction in DynamoDB and it sent out an email via SES. Okay, so that's fine, but we can go further with this, right? So let's go back into it and build this out a bit more via Workflow Studio. So let's say I only wanted to email an administrator if there was a negative sentiment detected. I don't need to know about every form submission. I just want to chase up the ones where customers are not happy. So then I'm able to search for a choice state here. I can simply drag that in, and I'm going to add something called a pass state, which is just sort of for logging, really, or for some simple data transformations. But this just makes it easier for me to read my step function. So I'm going to call my choice state good or bad, or I could call that positive or negative. I'll say this is bad. I'm going to add another pass state for when it's good. Actually, I only want to send out an email to a user if it's bad. Okay, now I need to define the rules. When should it take this path and when should it take this path? So I'm going to edit my first rule and add a condition. I'll say that when sentiment results equal to a string constant that says if I want it to take the bad path, otherwise I'm happy for it to take the good path. That's what I need to do. Let me just check my note. Yeah, that's what I need to do. So we'll apply that. We'll give that another test, right? That double save always. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the previous execution, the one that succeeded, because then I don't need to copy and paste my data back in. So do a new execution, same data, and we'll see what happens here. Now, in an ideal world, this would just run through straight away because I've remembered all the right places to, for example, in the choice state, I put the correct field to look for the positive or negative sentiment. But in fact, you can see from the key here that it's been cancelled. It didn't pass through that job. So if I come down here, I can look at why that failed. You see that this was an invalid path, sentiment results.sentiment. Now, this is where, before the creation of this data flow simulator, it was tricky for me to kind of figure out where in the data this results was stored and how I can access it. I would probably use step input and I would try and figure out where this negative sentiment is. But the best way for me to do this now is to hit this copy button here, and that copies all the payload that was input into this choice state. Then I can launch the data flow simulator, kind of emulate what just happened in my step function. So along the top here, there's all the different states, or all the different, best word for it, the different stages in the life cycle of my state, right? So I have the input, the input path, the parameters, the task results. So that's what the Lambda function passes back, the result selector. And these are all JSON paths stages that I can manipulate, at different stages of my state. I'm going to put the input payload in that gets sent to my choice state, and I hit next. Now I want to try and find this item, this sentiment. I can see that it's sentiment results dot. Oh, did I spell that wrong? Dot payload sentiment. Now I know confidently that that is exactly what it evaluates to, is this correct field here. That's the result of the Lambda function that was trying to figure out if the message was negative or positive. I think I didn't have the word payload in before because that's something I guess my Lambda function is adding to the output, which I hadn't realized. Right? Now I can copy this. I can go back to my step functions, edit that here, and I can go back down to the choice state down here, good or bad, and I can replace that with what I now know is correct because I've checked it in path simulator. If I were to run that again, we should see a better result, right? A successful result.
I think your audio is clipping every now and then, Ben.
My audio?
Yeah, might be move your microphone down a bit, like it's missing.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so that looks like it worked, right? And I can see that it detected the sentiment, it created a reference number, it saved that in DynamoDB, it realized it was bad, and it sent out an email to the administrator. And I can prove that that's working by putting in something positive, fill out a contact form just to let you know that, but just check. It should go through the other path. Oh, in fact, it hasn't. So we've probably not set something here to tell it to go down this path, right? So we can go into edit this. Look like that stop at the choice state, and we go to Workflow Studio. Perhaps I didn't set that
We're losing your audio every now and then, Ben.
Should I try switching to a different microphone? Hang on a sec. I'll switch to a different mic.
I can see your lips moving, but can't hear you saying anything right now.
Is that better? Is that any better?
Well, we can hear you now at least, so that's better.
Right. Which microphone? Let's ditch this really expensive one. Okay. Where were we? We're at the point where we've checked that our workflow is working. We have a choice state in. We've used Workflow Studio to build that out, and we've used the JSON path simulator to figure out why it wasn't working. So now let's have a look at how we can improve this by using the Sdk integration, right? So I mentioned that one of the things you can do is you can remove some of your Lambda functions by using native or by using this new Sdk task type. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how I would remove this detect sentiment Lambda function and just use an Sdk task type, right?
So let's just first talk a bit about what this actually means, because previously we had direct integrations in Step Functions. So you could easily add specific services into your workflow. But if a service didn't have a direct integration, as you mentioned, we used Lambda functions. That was the usual way of doing it.
Right. And it's worth saying, actually, that all of those 40 or so services that have direct integrations, they're still there. And if what you can do can be, what you want to do can be achieved using one of them, then that's still the preferred sort of optimized way of doing it. So the first place you should look is with this optimized integration type. So you can see actually this Lambda function here, there's two ways I can use it. I can use the Sdk task type or the optimized task type. And you can drill into the differences between them. But if there's an optimized one available, then it is preferable to use that normally. But there doesn't happen to be a native or optimized integration for Amazon Comprehend. So I'm going to use the SDK type for that, right? And so I just drag that in. I'm going to call it the same thing, detect sentiment. And this is the big difference. So here in the API parameters section is the fields that this particular SDK action requires in order to perform its function, right? And you can see this maps directly to what I'm doing in my Lambda function. If I open up my Lambda function in a new window and have a look at the code, I think this is written in Node.js. You can see the parameters here. I've got the language code and the text. And the text is provided by something called event.message. So the event is what's invoked my Lambda function. We know that that's the payload that it receives from the step functions, the very first step in my step functions. So if I go back to my step functions and edit that, I can just use the same thing. The language code will be en. The text is message? Let me just check that. Yeah, message. And I need to put a little $sign here so that my ASL definition knows it's going to grab this from the workflow payload. It's not a constant. And then again, I'm going to save this to a results object called sentiment results. And that's really all I need to do, or so we would think, right? But actually there is another step, which we'll get to in just a second. I'm also going to delete this step because we don't need that one anymore. I'm going to apply and exit. So what do you think will happen when I run this, Gunnar?
It's going to fail.
It is going to fail. I'll tell you why it's going to fail. Because let me just run it first. I'm going to put a -1. It's going to fail because although I've created the SDK integration and I've configured it correctly, my step functions workflow does not yet have permissions to run comprehend. So we've not told it that it's allowed to use Amazon Comprehend. So what we have to do is update this IAM role here to allow it to use that. It's important to know that step functions does not automatically grant that permissions to your workflow because, you know, security first and all that. So I'll jump into the IAM role. I'm just going to add it as an inline policy. What was it? Comprehend. And what was it called? Detect sentiment. There we go. That's all I need, I think. Give it a name. That should be all I need to let this work now. If we run it again. Uh-oh, that failed again. That's interesting. Oh, it's still not authorized to perform. Did I not save it? Perhaps I didn't save it. I've got detect sentiment, Amazon Comprehend, detect sentiment. That should have worked, I believe. Let's have a quick look at that, check that out. Execution failed. So it needs the permission for detect sentiment. I did run it again, right?
I think so.
Ah, maybe I didn't. Maybe I just clicked on the wrong one. There you go. So that's now running with the direct SDK integration. It's not using a Lambda function for that anymore. Every bit is quick, possibly even quicker. And my workflow is running as we want, or so we would think. But now you can see here that the choice state is suffering from some sort of error, right? So we can have a look in here. And it's saying it couldn't find sentiments results payload. So this is where, again, I would use my data flow simulator to see what's happening. So I just copy the input here, go to data flow simulator, paste that in here. And I want to find this negative again, right? So I'm going to go, it's dot sentiment results, dot sentiment. Okay, so it's removed that object that was payload, which is what we had before, because we're not using a Lambda function. So that kind of makes sense. That must have been something that Lambda was adding unbeknownst to us. So I can just edit my state machine. And this is something that would have taken a lot of time to maybe pinpoint before, when you're not able to sort of investigate the JSON paths, right? Without the data flow simulator.
Yeah, using trying to do it using logs, or just trial and error, just rerun it.
Or some sort of online tool, or trying
Yeah.
to step through and sort of write stuff down. Really awkward before. There you go, straight to the end. Oh, something interesting happening here. We can try and figure out what that is, or maybe it's just not got there yet. Let's wait for that to run. Did that run? Yeah, it completed. Okay, it just took a few seconds. So we could go ahead and replace that with an SDK object as well. This one's a bit more complicated because there's a lot more parameters involved, right? So it's a little bit more involved, and you'll see what I mean. So this is using a, sorry, go ahead, Gunnar.
Yeah, just one thing about what we're actually doing here. I think we tend to say that Lambda functions should be used for transforming data, not transporting data. And basically what we used to do before the SDK integration was just transport data. So we used the Lambda function basically to do that. But now we get rid of those. But if you wanted to do some sort of transformation of the data, you would still use a Lambda function, right?
Yeah, if you're doing some kind of transformation or some kind of computation, which is what this Lambda function is doing here. This is generating a random string based on some sort of randomizer function. So that's a reasonable thing to use Lambda for. There are better ways we could do that, but it's still, it's not a terrible use case for this particular workflow. So should we go ahead and replace this with an SDK integration?
Yes, go ahead, please.
So that would be SES, and it's actually, I'm just going to do send email. There's lots of different ways to send an email, apparently. That's funny. Okay, so is it this one I want to use? Yeah. So the best way I tend to replace these Lambda functions is by actually drilling into the Lambda function itself, because that's always seems to be the easiest way to see what SDK parameters I was using, right? So this one's got quite a lot in here. This is the parameter object. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste it below here. So that's the sort of default object that the Step Functions console gives me. And I'm going to try and map this onto the default object, right? So it needs a destination, and looks like I've used some sort of array. So it should work if I just paste that in there. There's a to address. I can look at that and say, okay, that wants an email address. I'm just going to hard code that in for now. Go. What else does it need? It needs message body. I'll take that from what I pasted from my Lambda function. And so these all need to be double quoted as well. That's the tricky bit. Okay, this bit here, data, this is what's going to get actually sent out. So I'm going to use that to say, let's send out the message. Message. And the subject, we can just hard code that and say. And then our source, what does the source need to be? The source is just the email, the valid email address. That's my email address. Okay, and then I should be able to delete all of this and see if that's got a little error. What's that error for? See if you can help me find the error here, Gunnar. Oh, it must be that. No, didn't like that. Data source. Can you see where I've missed a quote or something like that? Can the chat see?
Yeah, help us out.
Something missing. Destinate. Oh, it could be. Move that up there. That's that. That's okay, isn't it? That's valid. Body, text, subject, data. Oh, I can't see what's wrong with that. Can you?
No.
Ah, Jazzle. Where on line 16? Expecting an N. Oh, maybe I'm just missing one of them. Oh, there you go. I was missing a bracket. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the parameters that I need to set. And the other thing I'm going to set is I'm always going to save this to a different place. So I'm going to save this to. So I like to keep keep adding to the payload on a small workflow like this. So especially as I'm building, and then I can see what the data is looking like.
Mm.
And now I should be able to just delete this Lambda function. And I've got my SDK version in there now. I'll apply an exit and save that. Now we know that won't, oh, the source is required but was missing. Okay, let's go back into have a little look at what we did wrong with the source. It's there. I wonder if it needs to be, I'll put it at the top. Apply an exit, save that. Subject is not supported. Okay, great. I think I probably copied too quickly from my subject data. Tell you what we'll do. I'm going to have a look at the one before I messed it up.
Yep.
Paste that back in.
This is live demos, folks. So.
Oh yeah, this is what people come to see, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone struggling to make a demo work. That's what I enjoy watching.
Yeah, for sure. So in the meantime, if you just joined us, this is the AWS Nordics office hours. I'm joined by Ben Smith today to talk about what's new with AWS Step Functions. And we've had a look at the Workflow Studio to begin with. We've also looked at how to start using Sdk integrations. And in this case, replace some Lambda functions in our workflow.
Hey, we're just going to start again here. I'm going to take it back to this.
Yeah.
We're just going to start again. I reckon I had too many brackets and all sorts of stuff going on. So we'll go a bit slower. All we really need is the message, which is body and this bit. That's all we really need. Body text. It'd be nice if they had a whole convert to SDK, native SDK button, wouldn't it? That's probably the next thing we should start requesting.
Yeah.
And the other thing I need is the address in here, destination to address.
So in the meantime, if you have any questions, just post them in the chat and we'll try to answer those as well.
Let's see, how's that look? That might be it, you know. Well, there's no errors. Let's see. Yay.
Yay.
Okay. So remember, we know that it's not going to add permissions for our step functions automatically. So we need to give our step functions permission to run the SES send email command, right? So I'm going to add another inline policy, and I'll just do it through this service here. So it's SES actions will send email. I'm just going to be naughty and say all resources, and I promise I'll close it down after the demo.
Of course. There's a question in the chat if you're going to be at reInvent this year, Ben.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'll be doing a couple of talks, and actually, we're making a brand new demo in the Dev Lounge at reInvent this year called Serverless Espresso, which will be something to demonstrate how to order a coffee online using serverless technologies. And there's a big step functions component of that. So would love to chat to people about that there. Are you going, Gunnar?
I am going. I also
great.
have a few sessions and workshops, things like that. So
Awesome.
I will try out your serverless espresso.
Yeah, it's going to be real coffee too.
Let's go.
Right, so that should work. Maybe, we hope so, if the demo gods allow. Oh, I got 2 send emails in. I forgot to delete the one of them, but I'm pretty sure this will work now. So there, we've well, one of them didn't work. Let's have a quick look at that while we're here. We've got time. How do we jump in? Edit state machine, Workflow Studio. Which one didn't work? The first one, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the template one where, yeah, okay. Okie dokie, try that again. Well, that was quick. So we've built this with Workflow Studio. We've replaced a bunch of Lambda functions with some Sdk integrations. We've used the data flow simulator to kind of check out why our paths were mismatching and going wrong. Probably a similar error here. Oh, that's a weird one. Then, oh, I spelled Amazon wrong. That's why that didn't work. So it's to have a valid email address to send out from, and I sent out from Amazon. So that's completely on me for mistyping there. I'll just quickly edit that just so we know that it's working. Okay, so like you were saying earlier, Gunnar, that at what point do you kind of switch out from the console and go into your sort of local infrastructure as code template? And that's the new dilemma, I think, Workflow Studio, is you can go so far with it and you can keep going with it, but at some point you probably will want to start using some kind of infrastructure as code template to continue building out your application, right? And that's what I'm going to show you next. This is the point where I would switch back into my local IDE, and we'll see some interesting tools to help you do that. So here's my local IDE. This is Viz Code, Viz Studio, or Visual Studio Code, something like that. I forget what exactly the name is. But this is what I use to build serverless applications. This is my SAM template. Remember I said SAM, serverless application model. It's a template for building serverless application using infrastructure as code. It's kind of an abstraction on top of CloudFormation, if you like. And in this SAM template, I defined the various Lambda functions, the different IAM roles. I defined an API gateway resource, which invokes my Lambda function. And I define an API gateway resource, which invokes my Step Functions workflow. And I also define the Step Functions workflow here. Now I'm going to build this now as a synchronous express workflow. This is a different type of workflow, which was launched about a year ago at last year's reInvent. And this allows you to run a workflow synchronously so you can get the response. So what that means is I can send an HTTP REST call via API gateway to my API gateway endpoint that will invoke my Step Functions workflow and wait for that workflow to finish before returning the response back on the HTTP response object. So that's great for doing things like websites or what we're doing here, which is posting a contact form. So here's my SAM template. In a separate file, I have my ASL definition of my workflow. And at the moment, all this has is a simple pass state in there. So this is ready to go. There's a new feature of AWS SAM, which is in preview, called SAM Accelerate. And one of the things that SAM Accelerate has is a new command called SAM Sync. And SAM Sync, the first time you run it, it deploys your entire application stack to an AWS account. If you also add this watch flag to it, what it does is it runs a background process which watches for any changes in your application and automatically deploys that to the cloud in the background, okay? And what it does as well is that it distinguishes between changes in infrastructure and your SAM template infrastructure. It distinguishes between that and changes in code. Now, changes in code can be anything from a Lambda function to open API definition for API gateway. It can be an ASL definition. and it will detect changes in that code and use AWS API to automatically upload that directly to your account rather than running the CloudFormation transform and deploy process. So what that means is it's much quicker. It takes a second or two to save code. And in effect, I'm able to code on my local machine. I can press Control Save or Command Save. And before I switch to my terminal to view the output, it's already synced that with the cloud, right? And then those infrastructure changes, it still watches for them and still automatically deploys them. But then they tend to be much less often, right? Because, you know, as you're developing, your kind of inner loop is all based on code and testing code quickly in a sort of fast cycle. So the best way to test your code in the cloud is to test it in the cloud, right? So that's what this whole kind of new feature of SAM is really useful for, is synchronizing your local stack with a cloud developer environment. Important to know that you shouldn't do that with your production environment. This is just while you're building out your application. Okay, so all that to say, I'm going to run this SAM sync command now with the watch flag, and that will upload this application, which is just a simple pass state, a very tiny workflow. What I'm then going to do while that's uploading and deploying is I'm going to come back into my my workflow that we've been building out, and I'm going to edit. I'm going to go to Workflow Studio, and I will look at this definition. And here's the ASL definition, and I'm just going to copy all of that using that button there. And this back to my IDE, the infrastructure sync is complete. So now whenever I save code, it will automatically redeploy, right? I'm going to copy this ASL definition here. Now, something really cool that I haven't actually mentioned is this is using the AWS plugin for Viz Code, and it has a special feature for step functions, which lets you automatically view your step functions in your IDE as you build. And it also kind of auto-fills as you build in ASL as well. So that's a really handy tool to use. And as soon as I save this, by pressing Control S, you can see, look, it's automatically and very quickly uploaded that entire step functions workflow to the cloud. So it's synced that straight away. And I can prove that it's synced that by, we can edit something, right? So let's say we want to save to our DynamoDB table the ID of the user and the message that the user has left. And that's what it's been saving so far. And we can see that here. If we go to our DynamoDB table and I look at the items, it's saving the user ID and the message. Nothing in this column. So let's change that. Let's save something in the sentiment column. So I'm going to edit this locally now. I'm going to say it's going to be a string, and it's going to be, what was it? Sentiment results dot sentiment, if I remember correctly. Can't remember if that was a capital S or not, though. Let's have a quick look down here. Yeah, it's that. Let's save that in our DynamoDB table. And I should just press Control S, save that. We'll watch this down here. You can see it says it's finished syncing. And now if I come to my step functions workflow and run it again, let's come out of here, and come out here. And it's this one here. So it's uploaded this as an express workflow, different workflow type, remember. And I'm going to start an execution. Give it a payload. And now I should be able to go to DynamoDB. And you can see there it is. This one has the sentiment's also been saved there as negative. So the final thing to do here to complete this as a full application would be to plug this into a front end form, right? So there's lots of different ways you can do this, by the way, but the way I like to use, that's the wrong IDE. Let's go back to Viz Code. And if we look up here, when I first ran this deployment, this synchronization command, it gave me some outputs. One of the outputs it gives me is my HTTP API invocation. And then I'm going to switch over to some other code now, which is a front end for a web form. Okay, I'll show you what the web form looks like. It looks like this. Super simple. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And this is the code that defines that web form. And here is in that web form where I'm going to put what HTTP URL to post to. And the other thing I need to give it is the step functions ARN, which is this. So I'm going to paste that into my form code. It happens to be the same ARN, and I'll save that. And now this might not work because of the demos, but we'll see what happens. So this should be the complete application, right? This is me filling out a real contact form and saying my pledge. I fully expect this not to work, by the way. We'll see what happens. Oh, it worked. Cool. So that's realized that, oh no, sorry to hear you had a bad experience. It realized it was a negative comment, right? If I were to say, I love this contact form, then we should see a different sort of response. Yay, no negative experience, green light. And again, because it's a synchronous express workflow, it's waited for our workflow to finish running. It's grabbed the ID here and returned that to me on the REST call in the response object. So I'm able to use that in my web form. That's the demo. And that's pretty quick, yeah. Express workflows are actually really quick. There's a few drawbacks compared to standard workflows. One is that they don't run for as long. So a standard workflow can run for up to 1 year, whereas Express workflow can only run for 5 minutes. And another key difference is the console experience. So with Express workflows, you can't kind of step through each step of the payload, if you like. You still have CloudWatch logs, but it's not quite as easy to debug, which is why I started building this out with a standard workflow and then switched to an Express workflow once we were happy that it was working more or less.
That's cool. Yeah. Are there any differences in how the steps work in regards to Express or standard? Or can you always build it out that way, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, there's no difference in how the step works. It's more in terms of like the speed or the rate of transitions through the steps. It's much quicker with Express workflows, and they're also a lot cheaper as well, or a lot more cost efficient, I suppose is the correct way. But no, there's no difference in terms of the different controls or the different configuration of the workflow at all.
That's cool. So SAM accelerate then.
Yeah.
You ran the sync command. Are you able to start that way, or do you have to do a deploy first, or does sync take care of the initial deployment as well?
Yeah, sync does take care of the initial deployment. So this is the first time I'm running it, right? I guess you won't be able to see that initial deployment because I already deployed it. But oh no, here you go. You can see it. So essentially, this is what would happen if I had never built this application before. It would attempt to deploy it the first time, and then it will say, "Okay, your application's now in sync." And because I use the -- watch flag, it's running that background process to check if I'm saving any files in the background.
Right. I think this is really cool. I think 50% of my development time is waiting for deployments. Otherwise, that's my style of writing code, frequent deployments, testing things out. So yeah, I think sync is really cool.
Totally agree. There's a few little nuances to know when you're using this with step functions, actually. The first is that if you're using definition substitutions like this, so you might define something in your SAM template and then pass that to your ASL definition using a definition substitution. Now, if you use that, that's a great way of building out step functions, actually. But SAM Accelerate, being that it's still in preview, it then will treat your workflow updates as an infrastructure update and not a code update, and it will take longer to update because it needs to kind of reference back to the infrastructure part. So that's something the team are looking at, ways that they can improve that experience. But it's something that caught me out when I started using this. I didn't expect that. Just something to be aware of.
So not when you're making changes of those. It's as long as you have those included, it will treat it as an infrastructure update as of now.
Yes. So you see, I have these commented out. So even if I had this uncommented and I saved it, I think it might not even. Okay, so I have them uncommented now. Whenever I were to save my ASL definition in a moment, it will say, oh, you have to run this manually because you're using definition substitutions, right? It's because I've defined that here. So that's something that I know the Step Functions team are looking to kind of improve. But because I had that commented out and I pasted in directly from Workflow Studio, that's not a problem that we hit here.
And what about the build phase of SAM build when, well, whatever code you're writing and you usually do have a build step, is that affected in any way? Does it just do that step as part of the sync process?
It does do that step as part of the sync process, yes. And it also distinguishes between your code dependencies. It does it like an incremental build. So they kind of redefined that build process for using SAM sync. And the incremental build for SAM is something that was introduced a couple months back, but it's automatically what's used when you use the sync command.
That's cool. All right, so there's a few minutes left. If you have any questions for Ben about step functions or serverless in general, do post them in the chat. I think this was a very cool demo you showed us, Ben, of how to make use of some of these new features with step functions and with AWS SAM. And I'm, as I mentioned early on, I'm a huge fan of both Workflow Studio and of Sdk integrations. It's a great way to actually, well, first off, build your workflows, but then also be more efficient, have less moving parts in your workflows as well. Yeah,
I mean, the more you can reduce code, the sort of less you have to maintain, the less you have sort of dependencies on other parts of your application, right? So generally, reducing code is normally a good thing. So that's why this is such a cool release. And I think they went from something like 200 API actions to 9,000 now. So like the possibilities are really interesting.
And what happens when there are new API actions? Do they automatically become available in step functions now?
I believe so. I believe there's like a internal API actions table which everything feeds into, which the step functions sort of looks at and generates from. So I think ongoing that is the idea. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool.
Manifest, that's the word.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. It might mean that certain things are available quicker through step functions than through CloudFormation, for instance. So yeah, that's very cool. All right. Any questions to Ben before we wrap things up? I think not for now.
No.
But yeah, very cool, Ben. I think it was a really cool demo, and thanks for joining us today. No, there is actually here we go. So here's a question for you. Would it be possible to organize a workshop for step functions? Are there any workshops available right now that make use of some of these new features?
Absolutely, there are. Yes. So if you hang on, let me find the link for you. This is something if anyone's going to reInvent, which we'll be running. Let me find this. It's called Image Processing Workshop, and we recently redid lifted it to include some of these new features. So it should be, yeah, here it is. You paste this into the chat here. How can I paste this into the chat, Gunnar?
You can paste it in the private chat, and I can share it with the viewers. Yeah.
Yeah. So this takes you through. It's I think a 5-part module. Takes you through all sorts of different parts of the Step Functions interface, and it's a really good way to sort of start using AWS Step Functions. We do run this at various events. We're running it at reInvent this year. That's a great one to get started with for sure.
That's cool. All right. I pasted a link in the chat, so do check that one out. And with that, well, thanks again, Ben, for joining us. As you mentioned early on, we've pushed this a few times to be able to include more and more releases and features. And glad to finally have you join me for this. And thanks to all the viewers for joining us today as well. And thanks for your questions and comments. And with that, well, thank you all. And I hope to see you again next week on the AWS Nordics office hours. Bye-bye.